New York audience goers, the world premiere play of Tin Church is now being presented by Off the Wall Productions at the Chain Theater on 36th Street. It's written and directed by the true multi-hyphenate, Robin Parrish. I'm a big fan of Robin's, as she really is one of the most talented entrepreneurial creatives that I know. She's a great actor in her own right, but also a tremendous writer and director. And Off the Wall is lucky to have her. This new play, Tin Church, is an unsettling Southern Gothic exploration of generational trauma and the secrets families keep. The dream and waking world collide in this intensely dark comedy where demons come out to play in the low country South. I love it. To be actually 100%, I don't even fully know what Southern Gothic means, but Robin has said that to me several times. And it feels, I don't know, gay. Fantastical in all of the ways to me. I'm not calling it a gay play. I'm just saying us gays might like it. It's running October 23rd through November 23rd at the Chain Theater, and tickets can be purchased at insideoffthewall.com. That's insideoffthewall.com. And for Creative Risk listeners, you can use code TA24 for 50% off tickets. TA24 for 50% off tickets. October 23rd through November 23rd, Tin Church, world premiere play, Robin Parrish. Go see it.
First off, everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I think you guys are probably my most favorite industry podcast out there, because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
Hey all, Mike here. Before we get started with today's episode, I just want to ask you to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell below us if you're watching on YouTube. Or be sure you follow us on your favorite podcast listening app, if that's your preferred way of engaging with the podcast. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We read them all, even the bad ones. So leave a review there. Lastly, if you enjoy Creative Risk and you want to dive deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. We offer 3 membership tiers starting at just $5. As a member, you're going to get early access to ad-free episodes, weekly motivational content, bonus full-length episodes, and much more, including a book club. Come on. But it's more than just content. You'll be a part of a community dedicated to accountability and support, helping you stay motivated and inspired. So head over to patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast. Check out the description below for that link and sign up today. Okay, we're good. All right.
Just listen to him.
Why is setting up?
Just listen to him.
Jesus Christ. That's an inside joke. My God, why is it always such a fucking bitch to set up?
Well, can I be honest with you? I really don't understand.
Well, it's just always something.
And like, I mean, I do understand, because you're right. It's literally always something, whether it's like, how is it?
This is working great. The mics are not a problem. But there was the fucking this time.
It's just always. It's like you'd think it would.
Good podcasting.
You'd think we would have it down to a science by now. Bing, bang, boom, 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 boom.
Nope. And God forbid we get white wall in there. No, I'm just joking.
For the visual, no, but it's true. I think it's. You know what I think it is? It's because there's always a different element. It's not like we're never just doing the same thing. You know,
except when we do remote, that's always the easiest.
Okay, kind of, but then like
nobody cares about this.
Remember the one with Koplik, where like it was all just like the visual was all shake.
Yes,
like it's always something.
It's true.
Then if we're doing remote, it's remote.
Or it's whatever the fuck.
The audio's not working.
Actually, speaking of my autism, we just check really quick. That's recording. Where are we staying right now?
Well, this is why I'm partially saying this, because we're in North Carolina again.
Yes.
And working with seniors, finishing up our residency here. And so I'm staying at the Brookstown Inn. Mike was originally
that place was a fucking dump, dude. I was staying at the Never Go to the Wood Spring Suites in Winston-Salem. That was up front. Well, it's an extended stay. So there was some. Let's just say there was. I won't get into it, but it was an extended stay, and they didn't have. We went grocery shopping at Trader Joe's, bought all these fucking groceries.
Okay, but you know what? You know what? What did I say when we first got here? I said, "Let me go by the place where I'm staying. I want to see what's."
Well, this is why you're smart, because okay, a couple things. Let me just finish, and then I'll comment on why quality I wish I had more. Because we show up, I bought all these groceries. The kitchen looks like, it looks like your worst New York apartment nightmare, like your newly renovated corporate. It looked like that. The floors were like that weird gray. It was just.
Listen, that's funny that you have a problem with that. Let me be clear what I mean. This place was so bad, but so brand new that I said to Mike, imagine this place in 2 years.
It was
because
bad.
You were having a problem with it being so sterile. I promise you that place is not going to be sterile.
It's just like years. It felt obviously cheap.
Sure,
and it felt very like, and in the bed, like I laid in the bed, it was like those like terrible cotton. Those pillows that are just stuffed with cotton, like from like Michael's Crafts or some shit.
Yes,
just like the whole bed was like that.
It only supports up to 700 pounds.
Exactly. So that was a big problem. Especially if I have food in the bed. But and then they had no fucking, they had a full kitchen, quotes, full kitchen, but no plates, no cups, no pots, no pans. I called down, that'll be $48. I said, what? And it's not, it's not our card.
It was literally $48.
$48 for a pot and a pan. No dishes, no cutlery, and I was like, okay, well, I need that stuff. So it's on the school's card. So I was like, just put it there.
Classic.
But they were like,
and then they didn't have any.
And then they said, actually, we all out. And then as I was leaving, there was this dude and then I basically called the school and I was like, I can't stay here because it was bad.
Yeah.
And then so they put me up at somewhere else. And as I'm leaving, there's this dude walking in. And they were like, you got to iron. And he was like, yeah, I got to iron. Y'all need to iron? Yeah. And he was telling me on the elevator.
Slippery slope here,
he was on the elevator. He's like, they only got one elevator in this whole place, man. I was like, oh, okay, I'm leaving. That's how what do you want me to say? That's how the conversation went.
Anyway,
why Joshua is smart, we're going to keep all that. But why Joshua is smart was because he was like, you know what I did in advance? Like when I knew I was staying, I called the place. I made sure they had all my things.
I wanted to know how many pieces of cutlery.
No, I just wish I had that quality.
Well,
that's a good. It's parent. It's good parenting in this way. It's like good parenting yourself. They're like, let me make sure they have things. Okay, before a week ago, you were calling to see what the fuck was up.
I wanted to know what this suite was going to look like. But this is where Michael and I do well together too, because Michael's not going to do any of that. So like when we go places, he just knows that I will have done all the due diligence. In fact, when we were moving, I'll never forget that when we were moving into our new place a couple years ago, internet had to be set up day one. So weeks before, I'm like, we'll be there at 9 a.m. The first people there have to be the internet people. Like it's
smart.
Because I can't. But also, let me just say this, especially with housing. Like we work a lot of times out of town, and for me, and this has become more and more so the case, my home base, it's really important to me.
No, it's
really important.
I think it's a great it's a quality I wish I had, like to get that far in advance and be like even me going grocery shopping when I got here, that was a big thing. That was like a big step for me to be like, oh, I'm going to go grocery shopping and not just like get here and just be like, oh, what am I going to eat?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to be better.
And then we return. But your new place is good. You're at the Embassy Suites.
Embassy Suites.
It's like a hotel.
It's a hotel. I love a hotel. I love a hotel.
Because you like the cleanup after you.
No, they did yesterday, but I'm keeping the do not disturb on. It just,
really?
It just feels relaxing, luxurious.
Of course. Because you don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, there's literally, I guess that is part of it. You just have nothing to worry about.
But although I do clean for the cleaning people. Because I
do too. I plunged my own toilet.
God!
Yesterday.
I can't believe that.
What? What?
Well, I'm also just shocked that, like, I feel like at an Embassy Suites, the toilets are like industrial strength. So the fact that you had to plunge the toilet, I'm like, what do you mean? The thing is like meant to handle like elephant ears.
No, it was yeah. I mean, yeah.
Anyway,
all right. What are we talking about?
So
today?
we're in North Kakalaki. This is the episode, and so and we're filming a couple episodes in this moment because Mike is leaving soon to start.
The
Anything
Iceman
goes.
cometh.
In olden days, a glimpse of stocking was looked on as something shocking. Now heaven knows.
I'm excited to stay there.
Anything goes.
Look it up, La Costa Apartments in Naples, Florida. Ooh, La Costa, baby.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So we're doing a couple episodes while we're in North Carolina, and today, what we're focusing on is horror. I love horror. We're focusing
why did you
on.
choose this topic? Because Joshua chooses all the topics. He's the boss. So why did you choose this topic?
You much preferred, right? Well, because I love horror. I do
like
love
about
horror
horror?
films. Well, let me tell the topic for today, and then I'll tell you. Later. So we're focusing on horror films, but specifically why it is such a popular genre to make. Why you'll hear this all the time, right? Just that when people, and especially early career filmmakers, or people just making their own work, they make a ton of horror content because it is so accessible, quote unquote. And what I mean by accessible, and this is the macro thought, and we'll explore it, is it can be done cheaply. If you're seeking investment, likely to happen. So why? Huge global market, huge audience. There's so many ways to explore the medium. So we're talking about horror films and why it's such a popular genre to make.
And just to say, I gotta say this just at the top is that we're not. There are people who dedicate their whole lives to like analyzing this stuff, and
Oh, sure.
I think we're offering a very strong cursory and layman's interpretation.
Yeah. And also, if I may, I care
Yes.
less about the deep concept of horror as a genre in relation to the film industry, for me personally, and more about if you're interested in self-producing work and you're interested in trying to find a way to make some traction, why is horror a good consideration? That's really what that's at the heart of this. for
Yeah,
me
no,
in
that's a
lot of
good
ways.
that's a good question. It's a good question.
But going back to your question, and I don't know if it's true for you, I absolutely love horror, thriller.
Yeah.
Michael and I watch a movie most nights of the week, and 9 times out of 10 it is a horror film. Truly. And we watch all kinds of horror films. We watch slashers. My favorite are probably psychological. Like I references later, but I loved Killing of a Sacred Deer, for example. We have to talk about Kevin. Like I love. We watched The Shining here 2 nights ago, and I love The Shining. And The Shining for me, it's more of a psycho thriller because it's happening in his mind.
Yes.
Even though there's other elements. So I love a psycho thriller.
There's a lot of crossover with like psychological thrillers and like horror.
Yeah.
And although there's some differentiation, I mean, horror is so hard because, well, honestly, my experience with most horror is I always get my hopes up, and I see something, and it's never really that good. But like,
what's a kind of horror? And just to be, I think you were actually starting to differentiate this. I'm sort of lumping all of the types of horror into horror, to be clear.
Sure.
Like I'm not like Texas Chainsaw Massacre is as much a part of this as the amazing. I don't want to give away my comfort food performance, but it was so. Actually, I have 2, but. Todd Haynes, we watched Safe the other day. Julianne Moore.
Safe Room?
Safe.
What's that?
Such a crazy ass movie. Essentially about. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
I'm putting them both in the same category.
Well, but when you're saying like a psychological thriller
is the
that?
same for me as a slasher.
Interesting.
And when it comes to the idea of horror.
Okay, I could see that.
That's the lens. Like I'm not thinking about it as like only one kind of horror.
I mean, really, if you were to break down horror in my opinion, you know, you're talking about like supernatural elements, or like
Sure.
you're talking about like, you know, murder slash
Aliens.
like, you know, aliens even, which is like bordering on sci-fi, but
Yes.
it's still like crossover. I mean, it's a I guess it's a pretty loose, you know, it's who's to say what's horror, what's not, I guess. But I think that we'll see some, because like Get Out, like I've never seen Get Out, unfortunately, but like
It's good.
Get Out's a horror, isn't it? But it's not
It is.
really like,
It was genuinely scary.
yeah, but that's more of like a thriller in some ways.
But again, what's the difference? I mean, I know like Netflix categorizes them, and I know they are.
Well, you know,
different.
it's and we'll get to crossovers in a second. Crime, like when something's about crime, like finding a killer or something like that, like is Silence of the Lambs. Is Silence of the Lambs a horror movie?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, you know, the lines are blurred. For me, kind of what differentiates just like baseline a horror film from like a thriller film is like, oh, like when there's like that trope of like somebody's investigating a murder, or there's somebody who's trying to figure something out. A lot of times that kind of gets into the crime thriller category for me.
Do you know that movie with Morgan Freeman and Kevin Spacey and Brad Pitt?
Seven,
Yeah.
That's a horror movie. Yeah,
exactly.
I guess, yeah.
But that would. But
yeah, no, you're right. No,
but
you're right.
That's what you're talking about.
Yeah. It's like there's occult elements in that, religious elements in that. I mean, yeah, it's a broad definition, but I think one of the big differences with a lot of times with horror and other films, even these thrillers, is this first thing that you have here, which is why it's so popular, and this is the number one reason why horror is done a lot. It's because it has low production costs.
Yeah.
Like, it is, when a horror movie goes over like $20 million or is like in the 20 million range, like that is a risky game. Most horror movies are like 15. This is a general statement, but when you look at horror success stories, a lot of times they're under $15 million.
Well, if I may, I this was one of my comfort food performances the other day. This movie called The Coherence. That I don't know how much it grossed, but I'll say this: we were watching it, and I think maybe it was Michael who said, "Oh, I think it's probably like $15 million." I could tell it was low budget. I looked it up, $50,000 feature film.
Wow,
super smart, super well made.
Wow.
Again, I'm curious as to what it grossed, but $50,000 for a feature.
No, I mean, well, that's
because they said it in one house.
That's good. Well, that's the big difference to me. A lot of times, like the budget kind of necessitates, like Alien. Like Alien to me is a horror movie, yes, but it's more of a sci-fi because it has such a big budget.
Right.
Even though it's like taking place on like the ship only, it's like that's still kind of like, because there's such heavy VFX, there's such heavy like tech elements to it.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, a horror movie. For a horror movie to be successful and for people to invest in horror movies, this is something, and I'll probably referencing it throughout, the horror feature that I, have gotten that is once again rekindled interest, actually, that I was packaging with William Morris and with Gersh. This was a big point of, not point of contention, but a big point was like it had to be under $10 million. Like, and there were some elements in there that were a little like extravagant, I guess, but most of the time in the proper industry, they're looking for movies that have a very low production cost and that they can hopefully therefore make a lot of money on.
Well, and I'm looking at some of these notes we have here in terms of that ROI, because taking Get Out as an example, $4.5 million budget, and it grossed $255 million
right
globally. That's huge. We just rewatched the Blair Witch Project. Crazy. I mean, probably one of the most crazy examples, made for $60,000 and grossed $250 million.
Yeah. And then I think it's, Paranormal Activity, which you wrote here, $15,000, earned almost $200 million.
I mean, look at that, $15,000. I mean, Paranormal Activity. Let's just take that as an example.
Yes. You
You and I could raise $15,000 in the next 45 minutes.
Absolutely.
And could be in and come up with a concept, raise the money, and be in production in 3 months.
Well, Even like, because I thought it was important to like give some recent examples too, like Long Legs, which is, as we're recording this in almost October 2024, is one of the biggest, I would say, like hits of the year in a lot of ways. That had, you know, Nick Cage, you know, who's a star. That cost under $10 million, I guess, to market as well. They said, Neon said marketing and production and post and everything took $10 million.
Amazing.
And it's grossed so far $100 million worldwide.
Absolutely.
You know, and there's so many examples, even Speak No Evil, which just came out, that is James McAvoy, you know, which I would argue that's you know, James McAvoy's another A-list actor. You know, that cost $15 million to make, and so far it's grossed $43 million globally, and it's been out for like, you know, a week and a half or something. So this is to say, and we'll talk about why these movies gross so much, but really what the horror model is you do it on the cheap with the idea that you're going to gross a lot at the box office. And something you also wrote here, which I think is really good, is these cheap budgets, a lot of times, if you talk to most filmmakers, are positive because it forces people to get more creative. It actually forces people to build suspense. It forces people to like.
Well, you know what? It's to use the medium. Because let me say this. I'm pivoting for a second. I saw Grey House on Broadway, which was
which I heard wasn't very good.
It wasn't great, but I liked it. I liked it because I liked. It was Joe Mantello, right? And who wrote it? I forget. Lloyd Metcalf was in it. But I liked it because it's hard to put horror on stage because of the medium. It's hard to achieve effectively that same sense of scary. And just to say, going back to, a macro point about horror and what constitutes horror, is it intended to evoke fear?
Yes.
You know, that is a horror film.
Yes.
So, and talking about stage, hard to do that. That's one emotion that it is hard to evoke on stage, is a true sense of fear.
Well, take Blair Witch. It's like, the reason why Blair Witch with that low budget is so successful is because they have no money, and they chose to basically what they were going to show and what they were not going to show. And so on stage, that's harder to do. Like, really, if you're doing in real life scares, like, that's why haunted houses are very effective. Like, there has to be, it's hard to tell a linear play and withhold what the audience is seeing, because so much of it is a visual.
Right, exactly. But this is my point about as hard as a heart attack. I keep going. I just pivot back to the camera. I'm like, it's hard to have. No, but this goes back to your point about parameters, because I think parameters. I love parameters in art. You know, either a time frame or budget constraints or cast or whatever, because then you really actually do have to think creatively. And horror, and specifically horror on screen, and the way you use the medium, I think does a really. I'm very biased, so sorry about me talking about Michael Calciano, but you know, I think I remember he made that little. Did you see Something Bad that he made with Jasmine? Simple enough. Yeah. It's not some huge concept. Don't come for me, Michael. No, but it's the tiniest of things. How you shoot it, the blood on. I mean, you know, all
yeah,
the
of course.
I remember the blood on the girl with the hula skirt. The ending with the opening of the trunk. It's just like you can use, and by the way, conventional tools that work.
Well, yeah, you have to you have to be creative. You have to be creative, which is effective because you have to decide, you know, suspense. You know, Hitchcock was so good at that, is how do you build suspense? How do you show things without showing things? Like, you know, so much of that famous knife thing in Psycho was like the sensors, and like, you know, it's like, what do you see? And it's more, it's what people can imagine. You know, in fact, Skinamarink, which I want to reference later. Did you see Skinamarink?
I don't know Skinamarink.
I didn't see it, but that was a very big success last year. That was, it cost $15,000 The guy made it in Canada in his childhood home, and the premise is basically that.
Oh yes,
He had
I did not
this-
see this.
He had this YouTube channel where he was asking people like what their nightmares were, and he would recreate them on his YouTube channel. And a very common nightmare is I'm a kid and I have to deal with something and my parents aren't around. So the premise of the movie, I think, is that these toddlers wake up in their house in the middle of the night and their parents are gone.
Terrifying.
And
Where's it streaming?
And there's Shudder, I think, but there's something in
it's
the
on
house
Hulu.
with them.
Michael, we're gonna watch Skinamarink.
And the guy said the budget really required us to be creative. Like, you never actually see the thing, and it's like all this shit.
Yep.
And I'll talk more about why it was so successful. But let's talk about, so we're establishing this model of, at least when it comes to the industry itself.
Yeah.
And what the larger industry, why it's so drawn to horror is because ideally it is made on the cheap and it can gross a lot in the box office. And this next point you have is cool on why does it do well in the box office. This next point about international appeal. I think it's a really good point that globally horror translates, across cultures a lot of times. Things that are, even take like, sort of like the Japanese invasion and horror that we had here.
Well, I mean, so I'm going. I mean, I can't. I actually, I'm going to watch it tonight. I love Parasite. Oh, did you see Parasite?
Yeah, that's not really a horror movie, but yeah.
What?
That's not a horror movie. Parasite's the South Korean one.
Yes.
That's not a horror movie.
Okay, I'm typing into Google right now. Is Parasite a horror movie?
That's not a horror movie.
Okay.
You're like, somebody said something mean.
It's a thriller.
It's a thriller. That's not a horror movie. That's truly not a horror movie.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I thought it.
Are you thinking of Old Boy?
It's called a psychological. Yes, it's considered a psychological thriller.
Which Old Boy isn't even a horror movie either. It's not a horror movie.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's about. Yeah, that's a little different.
I'm looking at all these things. How Parasite becomes a horror film. It's not a typical horror film.
Yeah, I guess the lines are, but I wouldn't consider that a horror film.
Again, to me, it's intention of is it because it's a comedy, but
Yeah.
but there's.
I would say it's a thriller. A psychological thriller
Okay.
in some ways. But
Either way, the point is that
the point is when I think about the Japan, I'm talking about The Ring, The
Right.
Grudge,
Yes.
stuff like that. That shit translates. Like,
yes,
horror is very universal in a lot of ways. Like, what scares people, and a lot of times a very successful model here too is people recreate horror movies internationally. They recreate them for the US.
Right.
But the same scares are sort of applied internationally, so these movies can gross a lot globally.
Well, not to be so esoteric about this point, but just to say, like, it's almost like music, meaning
Yes.
it because the intention of whatever it is can translate, I would argue, emotionally more so than like. And this is a bit of ignorance speaking, but I'm thinking of like The Office, or which obviously has had also huge global
comedy's
success.
hard to
Exactly.
but especially like dramas, because a lot of times themes that are explored in dramas are a little bit more culturally relevant, I would say. It's hard for and like auteurism doesn't really translate globally in my opinion either. So it's like, and although I think horror does allow for auteurism and like creative license in a lot of ways, there's still a very, per your point, there's a very specific feeling you're supposed to feel, which is
Right.
you're supposed to feel afraid watching it. That's the main thing you're supposed
And
to
I would
feeling.
argue that it's through the filmmaking, less so than some. We'll talk performances, but in some ways less than the performances.
Yes.
That can be translated. So to your point, it not only has a huge global reach and potential global reach, but I also do think like with horror in particular, there's more of a cultish relationship with it. So there's a really committed niche audience globally.
If you look at genre fests or whatever, like genre film festivals, there's a reason why, there's so many horror film festivals, like specifically horror-based film festivals. You're absolutely right, there is, and I don't know why per se, but there is definitely more of a committed community to horror, like people who are really committed to even like cult classics, or like that's why Shudder surprisingly is still around. Shudder, and there's a bunch of things like Shudder, like Alter was trying to do this too. And even this is relevant, but Come Be Creepy With Us. There's like,
which is a film that Mike produced, that
Michael Calciano wrote and Beth Fletcher directed, which is like a comedy horror. That had, what was crazy is that being online, and so many horror shorts have this, is you have reaction videos.
Does it have reaction videos?
Yeah, that's like 5 reaction videos.
Really?
Like people watching and reacting to it.
Oh, I didn't know that. Michael didn't tell me that.
But it's like, what's interesting about that is that like there is, and I don't know why, but there is just more of community engagement. There's so many more
interest.
Like prestige drama doesn't really have like, there is no streaming service for like prestige drama.
Well, let me ask you this. Stop coughing. For me, but again, I love horror. So when I go to a festival and something's clearly a horror, you kind of like automatically piques my interest. I'm already more interested. But I don't know if that's a me thing, because some people don't like horror at all.
I think you said it, which is like, actually, this is a, a rough thought, but it's like, it's in draft. But like, because the end result is very clear, you're supposed to be scared. It's supposed to be scary, right? That baby carrot really fucked me up. It's like my body's rejecting the nutrition.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the carrot.
But the baby carrot. But no, the baby carrot. Because you know why I think it's interesting, because the end result is supposed to be very clear, which is I'm writing down the skidamering so I don't forget. You're supposed to be scared. It's supposed to scare you. Drama, comedy, I guess it's like, but comedy doesn't translate as well. But because when I hear that there's a horror movie, my interest is piqued, because it's almost a challenge in some ways. Like, will this be scary? It's like a very clear challenge in some ways. And I think that people...
And let me make up a very basic, obvious comment. And this goes with the filmmakers. You have to create conflict. So, for example, what was that movie that won the Oscar for Best Screenplay last year? Yes, Celine's song, is that her name?
Past
Lives.
Past Lives, yeah.
So like, for me, I'm not all the artists are amazing, we're all wonderful, there should be, we have to love everybody. But like, that movie to me, I was like, what and why? And I'm saying this, making this point about conflict, because if something is going to be, if the challenge is going to be there, that it has to be scary, well, I know something has to be at odds. As opposed to committing myself to the hour and 40 minutes or whatever it was of Past Lives, where it's like, today, here's a pencil. I like pencil. And I'm like, okay, I want something to happen. And so I'm already interested, because I'm like, there's going to be a conflict.
It's emotionally engaging too. It's like, and I think this is going to be then we can move past this. But horror is an opportunity for people to be in a heightened emotional state in a safe.
Yeah, I wrote down. It's like being on an amusement park ride for me.
Right.
I love seeing horror films in movie theaters.
Right. I do too.
I do actually like the experience.
Well, and this is why horror has always been a box office success too, is because, right, especially as things need to become events, right? So especially as like, we have options for streaming. A movie needs to be an event.
Yeah.
And although it's been challenged a little bit, like especially in 2023 when the box office was like really crazy and horror was really a solid bet. The horror movies last year were doing very well, is because horror is an event. You are going somewhere, you're having a communal experience of being scared, of something scaring you. And so, what is going to make somebody go to the theater as opposed to stay home and stream? This eventizing is kind of becoming even more apparent, which is why people are saying, like, box office patterns are always fucking difficult to decipher, and they're always changing and whatever. But, overall, in the macro sense, horror is more of a sure bet, even in this like market of people going less to the theater, because the event of going with people to be scared is still an event.
Couldn't reach your mind, lashed out like you did last time. And just like before, I tried to be cool about.
Hey, are you looking for your next music obsession? Meet Joy and the Wildfire, the NYC band that's lighting up the scene with soulful, raw sounds. Born from the creative spirit of my friend Samantha Joy Perlman, Joy and the Wildfire brings a fresh edge to a familiar sound, crafting music that cuts through the noise and speaks directly to the heart. Their debut single, Tears in Brooklyn, dropped this past summer, and just honestly, when you thought it couldn't get any better, they followed it up very recently with Shouldn't I Be Older, which is playing right now. I love this song. It's a track that's packed with introspection and emotional depth. I mean, this is totally my vibe. These singles are just a taste of what's to come. The band's full album, due out in early 2025, is being mixed and produced by Jonathan Jetter of Right Angle Recording and mastered by Nomograph Mastering, known for their work with Sabrina Carpenter, Taylor Swift, and St. Vincent. So, right now, stream Shouldn't I Be Older and Tears in Brooklyn on your favorite platform and dive into this sound that everyone is soon going to be talking about. That I know for a fact. Listen to Joy and the Wildfire. Check them out.
Before I forget, last night I watched The Penguin.
Okay.
HBO. First of all, I just think you're going to work more and more as you get older. It was your part.
You're like be that fat ugly guy, the Penguin.
Don't think about that, because he really is. He looks like an actual beast, but it's a lot of prosthetics.
Yeah.
But so don't think that. But honestly, it was like almost like a reincarnation of James Gandolfini. But you have to.
Is it
good?
Watch it.
Surprisingly, I actually thought it was gonna be bad, Michael, and I kept being like, because I'm not a.
Well, did you see the Batman? Did you see the movie that he was? It was based off. They had the movie,
exactly.
The movie that came with Robert Pattinson.
And yes, but I'm not a super fan of that stuff.
Yeah,
in any means. So first I put it on. I was just making dinner, and I was like, okay, whatever. And then I was like, oh, it was like surprising and kind of scary, and a great performance. And I kept thinking about you watching it, because that's totally your part. It's totally your part. Also, as a big digestion, we'll just talk about things we like to watch now. But I watched Wise Guy.
That's the
David
documentary.
Chase.
How was it?
Good. Also good. It sort of set in and Wise Guy, which is about it's a documentary about the making of The Sopranos.
Right.
With David Chase.
Right.
But everyone's sort of reflecting, Edie Falco, everyone's reflecting on the making of, the casting, James Gandolfini, who his sort of fall from grace and over the course of that process. Right. But it's good. And they sort of set it as though David Chase on the set of the psychiatrist's room.
Oh,
so he's sort of being interviewed himself, because clearly it's David's world.
I mean, that show's just genius. I mean,
it's an absolutely amazing show.
There's just nothing better than that show. Anyway, so we've established why. I hope we've established all of the reasons why it can be successful in the box office. And it's also successful. Look, date nights, whatever. It doesn't require a lot of thinking, right? It's like to sit down and watch like a prestige drama or like something, or
exactly.
It's a bonding.
It's like a trip to like an amusement park. That's what I'm saying.
No,
unless although Todd Haynes is safe, which is, again, I'm saving this actually one for my comfort food performance for the family episode, which you're not going to be on, but I'm specifically saving for it because it is so crazy to me. It is a true psychological thriller horror. You should watch it.
All right.
Safe with Julianne
Safe.
Moore.
Okay, so what's the next point we have
Okay,
here?
so just to say that I think the other reason why, and I think why partially I want to talk about the Deliverance and Get Out in relation to this, is that it's culturally reflective, meaning it's easy through horror to underline a message, i.e., and I'm put here going back all the way to Godzilla, which was the fear of nuclear war specifically, to something, or like real world fears like aliens. That's why aliens is I think a really attractive theme in sci-fi horror, because it's sort of, they are underlying fears we have, or things like Get Out or The Deliverance. So I talked about The Deliverance the other day, which is this Lee Daniels Butler film that Glenn Close is in, that sort of follows this woman who's lives in a dilapidated neighborhood. She super low income. Her mom, Glenn Close, is white, which it's sort of like these hot button topics of this moment. And the reason why, actually, this is a great example. This woman, the whole thing is, the home she's living in is possessed by the devil. And Child Protective Services is already on this woman's case.
Netflix?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because she's not taking care of her kids, because she has her own struggles, caught up in alcohol. And by the way, complex because she's also taking care of her mom. That's where all of her money is going to pay for her chemo treatments. I'm giving all that context because no one believes her that the home is haunted because she's this drunk.
I wonder how that did on Netflix.
Because it was number one.
It was number one on Netflix.
Number one. And that was my point.
I mean, you have to be careful because I feel like, although I do absolutely agree with you, like, you have to be artful with the cultural reflection.
I agree,
because,
but it was good.
Two of the biggest bombs this year for horror, Afraid, which is all about AI.
Did I see that?
No, you didn't. It was so bad. I saw that one. I was super high with Carolina. We saw it. That was a Blumhouse movie. Afraid, The Front Room. There is the cultural stuff I completely agree with.
If it's done well.
It's got to be done well, and it can't be like The Front Room, which is the one with Brandy Norwood that came out, where she's black and her husband's white, and her white mother comes to live with them, who's like, I don't know, doing devil shit, and she's also like, but she's like a super racist. I say this because this might be a controversial statement, but it's like you kind of have to hide the cultural stuff. You have to layer it. The point is that it should be scary.
Or in Get Out, which you should see.
Yes.
It's right there front and center, because the whole premise, of course, that he's dating this white woman. And something's not right with the people of color who are the staff.
Well, Get Out also was, that was 10 years ago. I think that was more
10 years ago?
Definitely, at least 10 years ago.
Wow.
That was also just more innovative for its time. I feel like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong about this. It's like you have to innovate in horror. That I completely agree with.
But I would even argue Squid Game.
I don't think that's horror, but
interesting.
Yeah, that's not horror to me.
Remember that scene when he's like getting punched on the platform? I mean, it's
definitely
terrifying.
Yeah, but it's not horror to me. I don't know. What is horror? Comment what is horror.
Well, because like if I'm scared, or if I'm having a scared experience, then what is that other than horror?
Well,
because Squid Game, and here's my point. I would argue that's a reflection of capitalism.
Yes, absolutely.
And that was one of the most successful.
Yeah, and you have to have a strong enough premise to hold it over. That's I guess really what I would say is like the really what's also interesting about horror is, when you talk about like Save the Cat or like these fucking books that are like all about like making movies. It's one of the most diluted, what's the word? It's almost very base. Like in one sentence, you will know if a horror movie is good or not. Like the concept is what carries horror more than anything.
Yeah.
I would even argue that the concept can carry. I mean, a director can and a bad script can ruin a concept, but like when you talk about like it's Thelma and Louise meets Godzilla. It's like that sort of basic sort of like filmmaking knowledge of like, oh, this is people want punchy concepts, they want punchy log lines. That I feel like is still true in horror. At the end of the day, concept is king. And then you need to have people who can execute it well, which does matter, but that's what people are looking for in horror. They're looking for like actually the concept of Afraid, which was that terrible AI movie. It's actually a good concept. It was actually like a really, really interesting concept, but then they didn't execute it well. But the whole point, the whole reason why that movie got made is because of its one sentence log line. It's like, it's about AI. It's about, I couldn't even tell. Like,
oh, wait, did I see?
No, you didn't see it. It just came out. It's in theaters. It's not even out digitally yet.
Oh, okay.
It just came out.
Oh yeah, it's doing on 24% on Rotten Tomatoes.
It's terrible, but it's interesting.
You saw it?
It's about it's about like an Alexa. I'll give it away because nobody should watch it. But it's about this like Alexa-esque thing that is a new product that like basically is sentient and it's controlling people. And the reason why it's able to control people is because it's able to blackmail them. It's able to it knows everything about them, so it's able to like and the company that is selling it, that created it, it runs the company. The AI runs it's like if Alexa ran Amazon, right? It's like it's so that's basically the pitch. Like imagine if Alexa was running Amazon, like, which is like a good concept. It's like, oh, and as somebody who's pitched horror before, you need to have, yes, the director is important. We'll get to that in a moment, but you need to have a good punchy concept. Like,
no, that makes total sense. Of course.
But I really like these next point. Why are filmmakers drawn to horror, and why does horror launch a lot of filmmakers' careers?
Sure.
Blumhouse's whole model, basically, which is I think is the most successful company making horror. I don't like a lot of their movies, but in terms of just like box office and financial return, their whole model is they make movies on the cheap and they hire new filmmakers. And they're allegedly, which I find this hard to believe because the movies are so basic, but they're encouraged to experiment, right? So filmmakers are drawn to horror, I think, is because good horror needs to be innovative. It needs to be something new. You can take the plug and play approach. Is it pouring?
Yes.
You can take the plug and play approach, but for movies to break out, like Long Legs, right? Like I did not like that movie. The only redeeming quality was the filmmaking was very good. The filmmaking was what pushed it over the edge. And so I think that to break out, the industry is more open to give first-time filmmakers horror.
Well, yeah, because I would argue that you really are looking for a point of view.
Yes.
So you're really looking for, what is that creative slant? Which is, yes. I think, also why kind of what we're saying, why that this is why filmmakers in general are attracted to the potential of making some kind of horror. I mean, I'm thinking about, there have been many conversations over the years with Brian, whether, I won't say the titles of some things because they're still in development, but these projects are, again, it's funny, I'm just musing now, and these somewhat low-key, ill-informed, semi-ignorant thoughts, but whether it's comedy or horror, it sort of serves up the opportunity to get creative, have a point of view, and again, I'm sorry to come back to something so basic, but identify some sort of conflict. What's the monster of the movie? There's some monster, whether it's my mind or an alien. In the horror film, there's some monster. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's an abuser.
I'd be curious to hear, like,
Gone Girl.
I'd be curious, which is not a horror to me, but it's like
again, I don't.
I think that's a psychological. I would classify as a psychological thriller.
Yes, but we just established the top that's.
Yeah, but yeah,
Like we have to talk about Kevin or Killing of a Sacred.
that's not a horror. Those aren't horror movies to me.
I'm stunned.
I think most people would agree with me that those are not horror movies.
But like, I just want to be clear. Saw is not the only kind of horror film.
of course,
In fact, if I may, Saw is not scary to me.
sure,
Psychological thrillers are scary to me.
but they're not. I think most of those movies are not horror films.
I understand, but going back to what we talked about just a little bit ago, let's change this episode title. Because I'm not thinking about this from the standpoint of horror in a basic sense. Scary movies. Why is this a scare objective driven films? Why are these so popular? You know what I'm saying?
I do. Yeah, it's I can't quite put my finger on what. Because
you just said Come Be Creepy. I would argue Come Be Creepy is a psychological thriller.
I would say here's why it's horror, is because horror. We should look it up. What defines a horror movie? Because horror needs to have. I think slasher films are horror. I think movies with supernatural elements are horror. Like you describing The Deliverance as a horror because there's some sort of supernatural force. Silence of the Lambs is borderline horror. I don't think, because Hannibal Lecter is such an iconic like boogeyman, but I wouldn't even say that's really a horror film. I would say that's more of a psychological thriller.
I know, but can you? Okay. So even if we can agree on that, can we just accept that that they do different things, but they have similar objectives of scaring people?
Yes.
Like, wouldn't you argue that Silence of the Lambs, which I would argue is quite terrifying? I mean, when she's trapped in that fucking hole and he's looming over her.
I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, it's a good question. There's a lot of. Maybe, yeah, I think that, yeah, I don't know. I'd be curious to hear what people say about it, because it's like, yeah, I'd be curious to.
Because I'm not taking away from the idea, like, I totally, and that's why they're categorized differently. If you go to any of these streaming platforms, they're going to categorize horror separate from thrillers, honestly, separate from sci-fi. Those are all going to be, so, and to your point, just because someone gets scared, if I'm scared at a moment in a movie, doesn't necessarily make it a horror film per se.
Correct.
But I'm sort of conflating the genres because I think that there is an interesting questionable crossover.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean these lines can be I mean, what's the difference between like a lot of, then there's like thrillers that are also action movies. It's like like a thriller can verge on an action movie too. It's
and I would argue Seven verges on action. Verges on action.
Yeah, that's definitely like I think that if you were to talk about like what Seven is, I think you would say it's a thriller, but it definitely has horror elements to it.
Yes.
I mean, but like Killing of a Sacred Deer to me is a pure thriller. That's not a horror movie. That's a pure thriller.
And what I hear you saying is like thriller and horror can both be scary. They're just different things.
I think they're different things.
Okay.
Like,
but for me, for the rest of this conversation today, let's just know that I'm lumping in things like that.
Okay. Yeah. We should probably change the episode then.
So when this releases, if you've made it this far in the episode,
Yeah.
we'll see what we've identified what this is.
Yeah. Because
But either way,
yeah.
and this is kind of the point, is I'm sure when it comes to packaging and then eventual distribution and even upfront, conceptualization and seeking funding, that people have got to have comparables that are very clear delineators between things like psychological thrillers and horror, especially if someone was getting to a point where they were looking for a wide release, that have to be super clear about categories. So with that said, getting back to why filmmakers like this, I do believe, though, in general, that's not even necessarily a lens that someone might go down. They go, how do I how do I have my creative slant on whatever this story is, and then it develops as it develops.
Yeah, I guess what I would say is, filmmakers often have more creative freedom with horror. And when I'm thinking about horror, I'm thinking more of traditional horror films.
And give me an example of one again.
Like
Halloween.
Like Halloween, or like Skinamarink, or like Smile last year. That was a horror movie. That's a whole. That is.
And by the way, it doesn't matter if I liked it. It's coming back. They're making a whole other.
Oh yeah, no, that was one of the biggest successes in terms of like this year, Immaculate, Cuckoo.
Yeah. The Exorcist,
Tarot.
Yes,
those are Longlegs. I think Longlegs is really a thriller, but then I would say it does have, it's a horror thriller,
sure,
because then there are supernatural elements that are introduced,
sure,
which I think make it a horror thriller in some ways.
Sure.
It's a good, take Speak No Evil, which I think is being marketed as a horror movie. Yeah, have you seen the previews for that? That's being really heavily marketed. I would classify that as a horror movie, probably, but I think it's just about one family that's like super fucked up, but another family staying there. It's not like it's it's a fine line. To me, a lot of times thrillers, there's I don't know. It's a good question, but besides the point, horror requires innovation because people need to be scared, right? And it's like word of mouth travels quickly. So people are looking for new scares. So the industry, and because it's cheaper, the industry is willing to take more bets on early career filmmakers with horror than they are with the prestige drama. Also because a prestige drama is probably going to have a bigger budget, right? Because you're going to have to hire stars in order to make it viable.
Right.
Comedy, one big thing we're not talking about that's coming up in this conversation for me is, why is horror more of a money-making endeavor in movies than comedy is? I mean, the R-rated comedy has disappeared. These movies are not released in theaters anymore. My opinion as to that, in a short sense, is that comedy is more accessible in a lot of ways. You can, there's skits online. Millions of people are doing funny TikToks, I guess.
Oh, interesting.
Like, you don't have to leave home. What are you going to go get in a movie that you wouldn't get from like a YouTube video?
That's a good point.
I guess, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here because there's this next piece that you have here, which is, the community around horror. I was reading this interview with this director, I forgot her name, but we're all going to the World's Fair. That was a big success like 2 years ago, and her newest movie just came out, which is like the glow of the TV or something. Oh, yeah, the TV's glow.
I know. We nearly watched it, but it doesn't look like great. But.
Yeah, well, she blew up because her first film was, and we know this. We just talked about, there's conventions, there's cults, there's.
I don't think I've watched this. We'll watch this. This is on Max.
Yeah, it's the same person who did the TV Glow or whatever.
90% on Rotten Tomatoes too.
So, I think that you've made a good point, which is that there's obviously just more of a cultish community around horror, and there's more longevity, ongoing interest. Things become cult classics.
And I think what's funny you said that about the comedy, because it's a good point. Like I don't need more of that.
Yes.
Like that's all of TikTok.
But exactly. But what's interesting, and I added this point because that director who was talking about horror, she was talking about why horror is so why young people who don't go to the fucking theater anymore will go see a horror movie still. When I was a teenager, I would still go see horror movies, and teenagers now are going to the theater to see horror movies.
Yeah.
And I wrote this thing now, creepypasta cursed videos at the end here. You probably don't know much about this, but like, there is a whole subgenre of, Reddits, TikToks dedicated to like cursed videos or like horror videos. There
The Ring.
Yes. Do you know what Slender Man is?
Of course.
So like that's creepypasta,
Right.
right? So there is
cultural fictional characters.
cursed videos that are like, this TikTok is cursed. People, there's a bunch of influencers that like create horror videos or like shit like that. Like Reddits, there's whole Reddits dedicated to like, I forgot what the fuck it's called, but it's like when you play games on Reddit, like people literally, I forgot, people, actually we probably don't have any people who do this, listen to this podcast, but like somebody will take a picture of a warehouse and post it on Reddit and be like, it's here. And that's all they'll say. And then like a whole Reddit community will be like, where is this? What's in there? You know, and like they'll look at landmarks and they'll figure it out, and they'll people will go there, and like they'll find, like sometimes they actually find fucked up shit there. Like sometimes serial killers do shit like that. They'll like basically almost do like a wild. I say all this because there is such horror. There is such a online culture around horror, but people just seem to not get enough of it. Whereas even though there's such an online culture around
that's
comedy,
a great point. That's a great
it's
point.
like
they want more and more and more.
Like there are scarier, like the shit that's on Reddit and like even some shit on TikTok's like way scarier than most
like
movies. 4chan. No, but seriously, like people are like that. There is, in fact, that's where a lot of like horror filmmakers are coming out of now. They're coming out of those communities, and like, and now like fucking Longlegs did this when we were talking about marketing the movie. I was part of like what the pitch was too, is how we were gonna use Reddit and like create these online like games, online / in real life games about like cryptic messages on random Reddit posts from the main bad guy, all this shit. Because people just can't get enough. I mean, it's why people are drawn to true crime. It's like the same fucking thing. It's like people can't get enough of that. Whereas I guess there's a limit to how much comedy people can take in some ways.
Or not.
I don't know.
It's
What kind of sick bastard doesn't want art that challenges the way they see and feel the world? Come on. That's why I love my buddy Gabe Aiello III. He's a Bronx-based master printmaker and cyanotype engineer whose work melds technology, engineering, and emotion. Gabe's pieces, which are etched on industrial metal, canvas, and paper, explore nostalgia, love, and the tension between virtual and real-life connections. Drawing on his background in physics and studio art from Miami, Japan, and China, Gabe creates prints that are not just visually striking, but scientifically inspired. His portfolio spans Tokyo to Sao Paulo and has been featured in world-famous venues like the Louvre, MoMA, and Low Art Museum. His work isn't just displayed, it's also collected and celebrated internationally by a lot of collectors for the way it integrates mechanics, electricity, and the fine arts into unforgettable pieces. I mean, Gabe's a super interesting dude. He's one of the funniest dudes I know. He's also highly intelligent, and I really love his work, and I know many of you will also really love his work. So are you ready to experience Gabe's artwork for yourself? Visit www.gabeaiello, that's A-I-E as in Edward, 2 L's and then an O, so gabeaielloart.com. You can follow him at Aiello Studio on Instagram to explore his incredible portfolio. Once again, that's www.gabeaielloart.com or at Aiello Studio, where science, art, emotion, and engineering collide with this fucking awesome artist. So check out his work.
No, comedy is a huge market unto itself, but I think you said it well, which is it's sort of we're always consuming that, whether we even choose to or not.
Yeah.
In fact, it was making me think, like, what an interesting idea for a TikTok, like a channel, a social channel dedicated to like creating horror.
There's many of them,
of course, but do you know what I'm saying? Like it's like every channel's comedy.
Yeah. No, I think the comedy definitely outnumbers that, but like it's just.
But the other thing, and just to say, staying on briefly about why filmmakers are attracted to this, besides to your point about it allowing for creative expression, just to say, going back to our first point, it can't be done for cheap.
Yes.
It can. And so if you're able to express yourself uniquely and creatively and cheaply,
Yes.
where you can bend the rules.
Yes.
So like the coherence, whatever it's called, which is shot in one location, but the whole concept is that they're walking back and forth, but they're it's like 8 people in a house that are living a wholly different life, and they're basically trapped into some vortex because of a comet that's going over Earth. And the whole thing is like so it's the same cast playing 2 different life situations. Obviously they're like, okay, great, we could go get a house in Joshua Tree and pay for that for 10 days and make a movie for $50,000 that then's going to gross millions and millions. So just to say, filmmakers are drawn to the ability to have nominal crew, nominal budget, nominal cast. I mean, you can do a lot with a little.
The challenge of creative expression, which those parameters. I think there's a lot of people who have are able to that challenge is exciting to them, and they're able to exercise their chops as filmmakers.
Exactly, and also we have this here. To your point about taking a chance, I would argue there's more of a chance for actors and filmmakers to really be catapulted.
Yeah, I'm curious about this because talk to me about this because I half agree with you.
Well, Daniel Kaluuya in Get Out.
Sure.
That was his big
the most recent example is probably that lady who was in Talk to Me. Like
the main girl?
The main girl in Talk to Me. She's kind of, I think she's blowing up. I
mean, we have James Wan here in terms of Saw and The Conjuring, because this Saw. How rich must he be at this point?
Well, for actors, here's the thing: for actors, for directors, absolutely. Directors, you can definitely catapult. I think it depends with horror.
Well, I was going to say Jamie Lee Curtis, obviously. However, let's just take Dylan Arnold. I know it didn't catapult him to stardom, but that Halloween that he did.
Well, that's why I think there is I don't think it's as, and this is important for actors who are considering self-producing. I don't think it is probably the most, like Micah Monroe, who was in Longlegs.
Oh.
And I think she was in It Follows. I may be making that completely up. Like, that's like a scream queen. She does a lot of horror stuff. I think that if you have a global success, if you have a film that's a global success, that's good for anybody. That's good for anybody who's involved with it, including the actors. If you have a film that is truly a global success, I think that for most people self-producing, it's a little more complicated than that, because a lot of times these movies do well, and they're noticed within the industry. But like Kevin Bacon's daughter in Smile, that wasn't like a catapulting movie for her. It's like, because I think it's more of, I think just like a lot of film, the acting is not as important as the filmmaking itself. So really the filmmaker is even more front and center in those movies.
Sure.
And although I think they can lead to success, like Get Out's an example of something that was truly, it grossed $250 million. And it was such a strong acting movie in a lot of ways. It makes complete sense. I think that the risk you run if you're somebody producing a horror movie now, like if you're an actor at our level producing a horror movie, I don't think it's as good of a showcase.
That's fair, but I'm thinking about, and I don't think you think of Misery as a horror film. I'm pretty sure.
Yes,
you
I don't.
not.
Yes.
But again, playing my game of not replacing the word horror with encompassing scare film, i.e. psycho thriller, that got her an Oscar. And that did put Kathy Bates on the map.
Well, the different, and I think you just hit a major difference, is that I think in a psychological thriller you have very rich, complex characters.
Well,
and Killing of a Sacred Deer as very rich and complex characters. Horror, the concept is more front and center in a horror.
Sure.
Like the concept of what the movie is more front and center, whereas a psychological thriller like Silence of the Lambs which all those people got fucking Oscar nominations. Those are very psychologically rich characters. And that's harder to find in a horror film.
It is, but if I may, I just want to, because it's interesting to keep saying Silence of the Lambs, because Hannibal Lecter, you know, he is otherworldly.
Yes.
And
well, the fact that he's a cannibal, I mean, that does that. There are horror. I'm not going to say here that he's not like a classic villain boogeyman type, which is, I think, what makes it. He's what propels it into the horror
or maybe
realm.
monster, like actual monster. I'm just picturing that scene, that great scene when he's put in that like private cage in that like house, like the building, and he has them all the police officers like strung up, like he's a like. Well,
let's take Hereditary and Midsommar.
Are
those horror movies? I mean, Hereditary is very much a horror movie, definitely. Midsommar, I think, is a little more border. I mean, yes, I think
religion.
I think it is a horror movie. It's because they're like, in this town and the town's trying to kill them. Like, it does feel less of like sort of a cat and mouse relationship game. But what elevates that movie, Midsommar, what makes it such an elevated film is the concept is that it's this group of tourists who go to the Swedish town as tourists, and the town needs to sacrifice them for whatever this summer solstice thing. Like,
but I wonder what the logline of that movie actually is.
I mean, it's something like that, I think. But it's like, but what makes that movie so rich and good and disturbing, which is different than scary. Also, let me say this: disturbing is different than scary.
That's fair, yeah.
And so, what makes it disturbing is all of the contextual relationships. That's what elevates that movie, is that, Florence Pugh's character and her relationship with her boyfriend and all of the context, that really elevates it to I would argue, look, The Exorcist. What elevates The Exorcist past just a simple horror movie, which, it certainly is a horror film, but it doesn't feel like, Friday the 13th or some shit, is how rich those characters are. Those characters are very developed and rich.
But it's interesting, because I would just argue and this is very much my opinion. I know it's my opinion because there are a lot of classic, amazing horror films that don't have complex, rich characters and work just well without them.
Sure.
But I would argue, for me, all the more meaningful experience if it can capture the values of what a traditional horror film is, and the characters are rich and complex, and you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because then I'm gonna have a very different emotional experience,
right?
Than if it's just as basic as it can be.
Yeah, sure. No, I agree with that. I prefer that good development, but why does this apply to actors? I feel like you have to be careful because, yes, it can be a breakout. It can be, but I actually don't think it's as common for actors to break out in horror films.
But let me also just say this, and just taking Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween as an example, or Kathy Bates in Misery. I know I really don't actually think it's fair to put Misery in the category of horror, but again, genuinely scary to me. But is what it asks of the actor. So, and the why from a self-producing standpoint, it's an interesting consideration, is because take that thing we were working on briefly together, not really, but then, like that character.
Yes.
That's something that could uniquely show off what I can do.
Yes.
In a kind of full breath.
Yes.
That's not going to happen in a quirky little office comedy.
The only thing I'll argue, I mean, the two examples you've given, one is not a horror movie. The other is
Misery.
Yes, and the other is, from 50 years ago, Halloween.
Oh, I'm
sorry.
But Daniel Kaluuya.
Sure.
Say it again.
There's not many examples.
He gives a full performance.
No, I don't think it's. I think, and there are outliers. I think that there are outliers 100%, and yeah, plenty of people have made their bones in horror, and from horror. Think about all the people who did Scream. Think about I mean, Johnny Depp, his first movie was fucking Nightmare on Elm Street. That's how he fucking blew up. It's like, but really...
again, just to say, the reason why it makes sense is if it's having a global reach.
Yes, if it has a global reach, yes.
Hey, human being, do you think you might have some generational trauma? Do you think maybe your families have some secrets that they've kept? Yeah, me too. Because we're human. And what better way to reflect on that than through art, right? And the world premiere play of Tin Church, that has been written and directed by the marvelous Robin Parrish, is currently debuting here in New York, being presented by Off the Wall Productions, and presented at the Chain Theater. Tin Church is an unsettling Southern Gothic exploration of that generational trauma and the secrets families keep. It is playing October 23rd through November 23rd at the Chain Theater in New York City on 36th Street, and tickets can be purchased at InsideOffTheWall.com. That's InsideOffTheWall.com. But don't just buy them at full price, because you know what, Creative Risk listeners, you get to use code TA24 for 50% off. I'm seeing the show super soon. I'm really stoked, and you should too. InsideOffTheWall.com, Tin Church, October 23rd through November 23rd. That because remember, part of what we're talking about here is just the lens by which someone would consider making these films and or potentially self-producing them. And my little indie drama about my bad relationship with my Aunt Margaret, who used to touch me.
Yes.
I keep going. That's like a real story. But that I hope just plays to such accolades that Sundance darling.
Look, there's a reason why if you were to if a hot young thing just graduated from North Carolina School of the Arts signed with William Morris tomorrow, William Morris would be trying to probably put that young woman in horror films.
Why is it gotta be a woman?
Because especially it's more of a because most of the time you have because there's the last girl thing. Because that's the Scream Queens is a real thing. If you want to talk about how you make your bones in horror, you'd be a Scream Queen. That's how those are the people who get.
Sure.
Or if you're playing like a really iconic, but there's also dangers to that too. Like the guy who played Freddy Krueger, all he does is play Freddy Krueger. It's like there are. What I will say is that what you're so right about is, like I said, if somebody just signed with William Morris tomorrow, a young woman, they would probably be, this is purely conjecture, but speculation, I mean, they would probably try and get her into a horror movie because she would have, because of the global implications. It's a good way to build it's a good way to build face recognition, brand recognition, because if that can do well globally, you're elevating somebody's.
And if I may, I'll go back to that project again. Part of what was interesting to me about it, and part of what was interesting about the interesting concept that you had alongside was the world building was, that has reach.
Yes.
And the reason I just think this is a really interesting point, because even as I think about it, if I was going, okay, and I'm thinking about that person we always talk about, the Marvel movie person who's like, I want to be in Marvel movies. Okay, well, if I really wanted to grow an audience, through a self-producing,
fair point,
might I consider really looking at the genre?
It's a fair point. It's funny. I guess where my mind goes, it's a totally fair point. You're probably right. It probably on the whole does, because I'm thinking about more of like, we're all going to the World's Fair. That woman probably who starred in that is doing, actually she's probably doing very well. Like, you know, the woman who was in Smile, Kevin Bacon's daughter, she probably is doing well. It's like there is
That's the white girl, the main girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, oh no, not that girl, not the girl who's like smiling and who's all over the poster. She's the main girl in the movie.
I don't remember it.
Yeah,
I
but I
watched it.
say this to go, you're right. It's a good way to build. It's a good way
for potential
potential reach, because it is going to get, because there is global potential. So you're very right about that. It's
That idea was a good idea.
I don't think you can. I think that a lot of times people do get stuck. I feel like you have to be very cautious, though. It's like, because and just accept that if you are in an indie horror film that does very well, remember that, here's what I mean by that. You're in a movie that costs $50,000 to make, and the movie does, this is a very blanket statement, this may not be true. You're in a movie that costs $50,000 to make, and it grosses $20 million in theaters. That's a huge success. That director can make whatever he wants, or she wants, or they want. The actors who are in that $50,000 movie are probably not going to see a lot of residual traction.
Listen.
From that.
You know what we're kind of talking about. Of course, in film, it's the director's kingdom, and for some actors who are interested in directing, great news. But from the actor lens, of course, I mean, well,
here's what you're spot on about, is there's two different ways you break out, really. Way number one is you break out within the industry, right? So this is where prestige drama does matter, is because the industry, even though people don't watch indie art or indie dramas or whatever, the industry is very tuned into that. So you break out either there. You break out either like a Jonathan Majors and Last Black Man in San Francisco. Nobody saw that movie except people in the business, but you can break out that way. The other way that you break out is if you are in a movie that does well globally. So even though the industry is not like super impressed with like Smile, even though they were, because it made a lot of money, like, you are now have a global audience at your disposal. So that's all I guess all I'm saying is that for you to really succeed in horror as an actor, unless you are looking to grow a niche horror audience, which there's a lot of actors who have made their bones off of that. A lot of actors, Robert Englund, a lot of fucking people. It low-key probably has to be a global, it probably has to do very well. It probably has to do like at least $50 million at the box office.
Yes, and it's all relative, because it's like like the Marvel universe, the thing we're talking about, growing an audience like that, to get a profile big enough to even really continue to be considered, of course. But actually, part of what this takes me to is this next point, that part of this has been a bit revolutionized. And I'm specifically giving A24 this credit.
Yes.
Because I do think that A24, is, to use the word you used earlier, has sort of brought the auteur front and center when it comes to things like Hereditary and The Witch. Michael said he didn't like The Witch. I remember liking The Witch. It has become...
And look, The Witch blew up Anya Taylor. That was like her big breakout,
right.
Was that movie.
And this is what I mean, like, and probably this next point that I put here about the audiences who might have formerly dismissed the genre, I think are taking it a little more seriously, because like that, I am the audience for that.
Yes.
I am the audience for something.
Elevated horror, auteur-driven horror.
100%.
Yes. 100%. No. And I think it's important to note, because you're either really going in, again, I think what you take from A24 that they do well, although they did just have their biggest misstep recently in a horror movie, but what have they consistently delivered on?
What misstep?
That was The Front Room with Brandy. That was like their big horror movie this year, and it bombed. Okay, but
I'm gonna write that down too.
is they're looking at innovative innovative, elevated movies. And what it has shown, the reason why it has revolutionized horror, as per your point, is because it has shown the rest of the industry. The rest of the industry has risen to meet that standard a bit. You know, it has risen to meet the standard of a Hereditary, a Midsommar, a Witch, which are artfully done movies, and audiences have come to expect movies that are a little bit more elevated to an extent. And
I would argue is interesting. It could almost be like a gateway to the rest of the industry for people who might think of the genre as one thing.
Yes. I think you're No, I think it's a good point. I think that they have bridged that gap very well between sort of like auteur, you know, really filmmaker driven, innovative, you know, very present films that are done very well with horror. They have made that, you know, Blumhouse, which I fucking think sucks. I mean, I have not seen one Blumhouse movie I've enjoyed. But Blumhouse is like The Conjuring, is like Insidious. They did Megan.
I've seen all of those.
Yep.
I haven't really liked any of them.
Well, you know, the difference with those movies and why they do not feel like A24 movies is, although allegedly, like I said, like Blumhouse's model is like to give filmmakers leniency and creativity, they feel very formulaic. A Blumhouse movie feels very formulaic. And it feels very typical. It doesn't feel new. It doesn't feel interesting. It doesn't feel like it's... Whereas, I mean, Hereditary, Hereditary, you don't even realize it's a horror movie until, like, the end, really. It's like... It really is kind of like basically just like a family drama for, like, most of the movie until it's not. And they're able to explode forms. And Blumhouse, although, look, Blumhouse makes a lot of... You know, they make a lot of money. They do it well. Like, I am not a fan. And you're going for two different experiences. You know, I don't think you go to a Blumhouse film and you're genuinely terrified. Blumhouse feels very safe, whereas A24 movies, they can really cut you to the
right. Exactly. There's almost examining the human experience, which again is partially what I'm saying in terms of just my own style, but also why I guess I'm conflating some horror elements because they get me more, so to speak.
Well, and the thing I really wanted to add to this is talking about what's key to all of this is marketing.
Yeah.
And why I think horror is also successful is because it allows for more creative marketing. You know, last year was a great example of that. You know, Smile, they were doing that thing. Did you hear about the baseball game? They went to like a Yankees game or something.
No.
They bought seats. Blumhouse bought like seats behind like the pitchers, behind the bat. That's how athletic I am. Where the batter bats.
Oh yeah.
Home base, of course. They bought tickets behind home base, and there was just a woman like sitting in the seat right behind the batter, just going like this for the whole game, looking at the camera, and it went viral. And like, you know, they were doing stuff like that. They were placing these people who were just smiling in like these weird locations. You know, a big reason why Skin and Marink was so successful, you know, was, you know, it went to Fantasia Fest, which is in Canada, and it got really well reviewed there. And then they released it on their online platform, like as these festivals do, and it got pirated off the platform. And it went viral. Social media, TikToks were made. This is the scariest movie ever made. Da 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 da. You know, it really blew up on TikTok. Sort of like, you know, allegedly it was pirated. I wonder if it was leaked, honestly. It's like, this movie, you're not supposed to see this movie. This is like the scariest movie playing right now at this festival. You know, Megan, which was a huge success. That was about the robot. I mean, that was all the TikTok dance. The reason why that blew up was because of her TikTok dance.
Right.
You know, and Long Legs, which, you know, is very big this year. I mean, that probably had the best marketing of a movie.
What is your point about the marketing?
My point with the marketing is that these are all more creative ways to market movies. These are more, you can really build buzz.
Yes.
It's difficult to build buzz
around like the holdovers.
Exactly.
Like, what are you gonna do?
Well, even
roll
like,
an
you know,
eye down the street or something.
Like, you know, Barbie. Like, let's take Barbie and Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer, you're able to build buzz around that
with Barbie.
Well, yes, you were able to build buzz behind Oppenheimer because it's like, oh, Chris Nolan, there's name recognition.
Yeah.
But like a movie like, I'm trying to think about like a drama equivalent. It's like
just take Past Lives.
Past Lives. It's difficult to build buzz because it's like you have to see this movie because when something, it's very. Yes. When the whole point is this movie will scare the shit out of you.
Well, and by the way,
you can really effectively build buzz.
And you know, it's like and you could build it around Halloween. I mean, meaning like you could to your point, it's easier to create a cultural ripple effect.
Yes, virality.
Exactly.
Well, like the big thing that Longlegs was so like Longlegs. I mean, the marketing people were like, their whole push was, you know, Nick Cage was Longlegs. They made this really cryptic, like enigmatic trailer. You didn't really know what it was about. You just knew Nick Cage was in it, and they didn't show him. They purposefully, like, you know, the movie posters were like she was sitting in front of him, so you didn't see his face. In all the trailers, he's covering his face. So, you know, it's really smart because literally what it does is go, oh my God, he must look so fucking scary.
Right.
They're not showing it. So already now how do you create anticipation like that for a drama?
Right.
For A Few Good Men. You know, how do you create anticipation? Like, I need to see what the thing is. I need to see what's... And another thing they did, which was fucking genius, was the lead actress. Did you see this? I'm surprised you didn't see these ads. They were like all over my fucking
For
shit.
what?
For Longlegs. Like all over social media. But like, she had a heart monitor on, and literally the thing was like, they took her heart rate for her first scene with Nick Cage, and she had never seen him before, and they had her real heart rate, and it spiked to like 117 beats per minute during the scene with him. That was a whole fucking ad campaign they did. Oh, it was huge. It was like, this is Micah Monroe's real heart rate when she did her scene with Nick Cage, jumping from 80 beats per minute to 117 beats per minute or something crazy.
Yeah.
And so, again, you're able to build anticipation. What is it? What is it going to be? What's the bad guy going to be? How is this going to scare me? It's more difficult to even do that with a comedy. It's like, it's difficult to build anticipation because the whole point of a horror is something is revealed, something's found out.
No, I think it's a good point. I think it's a good point.
Because really this is where the success lies. Like even why this movie fucking whatchamacallit, Speak No Evil has done so well, probably, even though I don't know how much better it is than their other movies, is they really put a lot of marketing dollars behind it. They put a big marketing campaign behind it. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up, but even though I do think this is one of the most important things, is there's more creativity, like I'm saying, in how you market horror.
Right.
You can post Reddit, like I think that like Longlegs took out newspaper ads that were like cryptic.
Well, it's why the idea you had about the other project that we were talking
Yes.
about was so good, and I don't know why it ever veered away from that. I said that to you.
No.
I don't know, because to me that was super interesting.
And I mean,
you know?
how can you do something like that equivalency with a drama or a comedy?
You can't.
You really can't.
So, the future.
Well, you know, and I added this point, the future, because
like marketing.
You know, yes, horror is the safest bet you can make in a very unsafe market. But I just want to point out, and we've had some big successes over the past couple of months. But the beginning of this year was not good for horror. This was a very bad year for horror in the beginning. And, you know, these movies like Night Swim, Immaculate, The First Omen, you know, Abigail. These were all horror movies that bombed, completely fucking bombed. And why did they bomb? Well, the common thread is that these movies were not well received. They were not good movies.
Well, that's AKA bomb.
Yeah.
Meaning
Well, I'm talking about more in terms of like people going to see the movie. Like they did not make money. Like Abigail had like also a lot of these movies also had higher budgets. So like even this Halle Berry movie, Never Let Go, that just came out, which is a horror movie, that had a $25 million budget. Like that's a big risk. Like I said, if you were getting above the 20 million range, you are in a very risky territory with horror. So a lot of these movies did have bigger budgets, which was a problem. And they also just were not good movies. And word gets out if a movie is bad.
Sure.
And so I think that, even Smile, Megan, which, I don't think are like great movies, they're new. They're different. It's a different twist. Long Legs, really, even though it's like a basically Silence of the Lambs repeat, you could tell it was fresh. You could tell it was innovative. You could tell it was different. Whereas so many of these other movies seem to be following sort of a formulaic pattern. So one thing that will not change with horror is you have to make a very innovative, good movie above all else. That's and break the rules a little bit.
100%. I was pulling up
No.
our review.
We have a review.
Yeah, but we got to the top. No, totally. I think in a macro sense, just to say yes to this being a rough top of the year, but I think what we can assume and safely assume is that this is probably going to be one of the most sustained successful genres for a very long time, and
yes.
and still allows for, to our points about the freedom of creativity and or the potential low budget nature. And I just want to say something about Jordan Peele and what Lee Daniels Butler have done. It's not that are the first ones to create cultural narratives or concepts of horror films based off of, what we're experiencing, but we're seeing a diversification of storytelling that I think is also going to buoy the genre. I say all that just because, going back to the main point of what we were sort of exploring today, was what makes this genre so popular, and why is it a useful consideration for self-produced
Well,
work?
and I just want to briefly say, because I think this is important. The hardest thing with horror, from a producing standpoint, as an actor, is this is the problems. We had a horror script that was people fucking. The reason why I think it is reignited again is because people recognize that the script is wholly unique. It's a wholly unique script, wholly unique voice.
Out of curiosity, what makes it wholly unique? Because I liked it. But I don't. What makes it wholly unique?
I think that it's more disturbing than any other horror film I've seen. Like most horror films I've seen, I think it's truly more disturbing. Mm-hmm. I think that the premise, although not incredibly unique, the way it's presented and structured, I think is totally different. Mm-hmm. I think the main villain, the main boogeyman, is not like other boogeymans or bad guys. Look, it's objectively, the reason why it's gotten as far as it has with very little work is because the script is great.
I like it. I'm not at all.
I think that, but again, that's a very risky movie in a lot of ways because of how dark it is and but the big problem we were having with it, frankly, was like, if you do need, which I think you do, if you do need an innovative director with a strong voice, as opposed to somebody who's directing like, Winnie the Pooh, The Murderer 3 or whatever just came out, like some B-level horror film. If you are looking for a true visionary, somebody who's going to break through the noise, somebody who's really going to make, those people already have their own projects. So as an actor producing, like one of the difficulties we had with getting our movie produced and getting directors to look at our movie is that they already had horror movies they were doing.
Of course.
So like one of the big hang-ups, And honestly, if the film continues, this is what needs to be done, is like the writer needs to direct it. It's like the writer should direct it. That's what should happen. It's because he's not going to find somebody who's at the quality that the movie needs to be, who's going to direct that over their own movie. We had plenty of people who were interested who were B-level or like even they've directed A-level movies but didn't really have strong voices or couldn't match really how the script was innovative in a lot of ways. And I say this as an actor because it's harder to probably produce horror than you imagine unless you probably find, like, I think you have to really have a strong relationship with the filmmaker. You probably have to have a very strong relationship with the filmmaker. And you need to collaborate on it together from the ground up probably, or you find somebody who's interested in directing horror and who already has a script and you do it with them on that or something. Because I guess all I'm implying that it's if you write a horror script, if I wrote a horror script today and tried to get it produced, that'd be very difficult.
Right.
I would probably need to direct the
exactly.
movie. Yes.
Totally fair point.
Yes.
So let us know your thoughts
was
on what constitutes what?
You're over this episode.
No, I've lots of good shit. I mean, inclusive of, what is a horror film? I think you're actually closer to what I think you're right, but sound off in the comments on your thoughts on what is a horror film. Is Killing of a Sacred Deer a horror film? I think so. Let us know.
Lawrence of Arabia is a horror film.
But let's actually, before we do the review, let's talk about our comfort food performance. I'm gonna make sure I get the name. I know mine. And it is a, what'd you say?
I just plucked a nose here. That was a long one.
So I'll tell you mine. I just want to make sure it's not called the. It is called the. So is this the one I'm talking about? So, yeah. So we watched The Cure.
The Cure?
Or excuse me. No, it is called Just Cure. 1997. Cure. It is a Kiyoshi Kurosawa. It was scary. It is my comfort food performance. LOL. Basically the story of a man who, this guy was a floater, and whenever people would come in contact with them, what started to happen was those people would end up killing other people and themselves. And he was a hypnotist, and this very odd dude, and all the way through.
Is this a foreign film?
Japanese, Korean, I don't remember. Sorry. I think it's Japanese. Scary, unsettling. But again, another version of like, is it horror? Because he was in a trance, the kid, and was super calm, but he would hypnotize people, and then they would do these crazy, horrible things. It's called Cure. It's a great film. Great film.
I would say, honestly, comfort food performance. This isn't really a comfort food performance. Do you know Funny Games? So is Funny Games a horror movie?
I think so.
I don't think Funny Games is a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's bordering on it, but it's coming up for me because that's a very terrifying movie. Yep. Very scary movie. The original is great, and I think is a better movie, but Naomi Watts is it, and Tim Roth in the new one. Talk about performances. They acted the shit.
That's great.
The shit out of that. Basically, the movies, for people who don't know, which I don't know how you don't know what Funny Games is, but it's just about this suburban couple. I think they have 2 kids, and there's a home invasion, and these youths invade their house and just
terrorize them,
and really just torture them. Yep. It's just like, it's pure torture porn. Yep. And Naomi Watts and Tim Roth really have the biggest challenge, I think, that an actor could have, and they deliver in spades. Just, they crushed that movie.
Yeah, no, we really like that movie. We
have you seen the original?
Yeah, but we watched the remake a couple of times.
Oh well, Mike Haneke's just like fucking amazing.
And I want you to watch Safe, Todd Haynes.
I will. I'll watch it.
It's crazy. Okay, so here's our review, y'all. This is a new review from the other day. 5 stars. It's called Unfiltered Thoughtful Motivation. Joshua Morgan and Mike Labadia, who insists on going by Labad, offer us a weekly meditation on how to thoughtfully and practically approach working in the arts with a focus on the acting side of the entertainment industry. Joshua's analytical approach is complemented by Labad's more instinctual route. It's nice. It's a nice way of saying disgusting. More instinctual route through the worlds of self-producing representation.
Joshua's cold sociopathy. Cold. Cold, calculated sociopathy.
Labad's more instinctual route through the worlds of self-producing representation relationships and personal artistic marketing among myriad topics, all without a politically correct filter.
That's right.
The show, a mix of J and L, in discussion interviews with individuals from the middle of the industry pack, offers no huge stars, but also steers clear
Except us.
of fresh new it performers. Instead, they speak with women and men who often quietly, consistently carve out a life and living in the arts, allowing them to share wisdom learned along the way, using ribald humor and non sequitur questioning with occasionally moving moments. Every episode offers the listener actionable advice on how to make a living in a life in the arts. Creative risk worth the weekly listen.
Fuck yeah, who was that?
Nick Bailey.
Yay. I mean, I knew it was, but
Yeah.
he wrote his name.
Thank you for that, Nick.
All right. This is an episode where Josh is going to beat me afterwards.
No, what
I
it
should
is
have
is
put
that
up face.
what it is that we have to look at the plan, and we've got a meeting in 20 minutes. This is really what it's been.
We have to look at the plan?
We do. I know.
Which one?
Goodbye. Talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Creative Risk. If you've enjoyed, please don't forget to like, subscribe here on YouTube, follow our channel, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. A quick review on Apple Podcasts, like we said, would mean the world to us. We read them all, as I said. And if you want to go deeper, join our Patreon community starting at just $5 a month for exclusive content, motivation, and a supportive community. Check out patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast, and we'll see you next time.